Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Brain Gains, everybody. We are just so lucky that Fred Pike is here with us today. If you don't know who Fred is yet, you soon will understand why he is such an important part of our community here at DDU. He is an expert as well as a co-teacher for some of the programs that we have at Data Driven U, and just an absolute well of knowledge and great sense of humor. So with that, today he's going to be talking about BigQuery equals big bucks, estimating the cost of linking GA4 to BigQuery, as well as some options for how to integrate the two. So Fred, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. And so that's a pretty interesting switch to the attribution models that you mentioned, Kayla.
Mm-hmm.
The other really important news that happened, which really for agencies, it's like, oh my God, this is awesome, which is that Google increased the number of properties that you could have in one account from historically it was 200, then they dropped it to 100. Now it's 2,000. And when we heard that here, it's like, oh my God, finally, we don't have to jump between 10 different Gmail accounts to figure out where this client.
Or like go and track down a support person to ask them to increase the number of allotted properties.
Yes, which we've never done. But oops, that's not what I wanted. But yeah, that's so that was, I can't tell you how much joy we had on that. So let me get this going, and you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So is BigQuery equal to big bucks? And what we're going to do is estimate the cost of linking GA4 to BigQuery and talk about the two ways to do that. So I have to say, I kind of struggled with the best way to approach this. If Kayla probably saw earlier versions of this presentation with some pictures and stuff, and there are multiple ways that I could have approached it. And what I decided to do was take the approach that I've been using with clients, which is walking them through the BigQuery process, why to do it, and what's involved in it, and what the cost ultimately is, because that's one of the things they want. So what we're going to do is work through the BigQuery client process I've been using, primarily with GA4 migrations, but not exclusively there. And it's actually pretty interesting. The reason I've been using it more with clients recently is because I've gotten feedback from them once we won the deal, is that nobody else is talking about this. And it's like, oh, these guys really know what they're doing, because they're bringing up a topic that no other marketing agency we're talking to has brought this up. So we won at least a couple of deals just based on this. So I thought it'd be interesting to just kind of go through the BQ client process I'm using. And that'll also answer the question, is BigQuery equal to big bucks? So we start off when I'm talking to a client, I start off with why you want to set up BigQuery. We've talked about the GA4 migration already. You've got to do it. There's no choice. But as part of that, you really want to set up BigQuery, and there's a few reasons for that. First, it's free. In the old version in Universal Analytics, you can only do the BigQuery integration if you had GA360. So if you're paying $150,000 a year or more to Google, then you could set up the BigQuery integration. But now with GA4, it's free, and free in quotes. There's a limitation in GA4 of 14-month data retention that primarily shows up in the explorations. In the regular reports, the standard reports, it doesn't affect it, but it will limit, limit how deeply you can segment data that goes back more than 14 months. If you have it in BigQuery, that's not an issue. If you're working with Looker Studio, you can no longer really do reports directly against the GA4 API. You really have to do it because of quota limitations. You guys know all this, so I won't go into detail on that. But you really need to do that against BigQuery. And it's better to do it sooner than later, because even though it's free, it doesn't backfill. So if you do it from the beginning, from when you first have GA4, or as soon as you can, set it up that way, then you'll have data. It'll be your own data forever and ever from the point that you set it up. And then the question that comes up, well, what's the cost? How much is this going to cost me? And I'm concerned about adding to the budget. And these discussions are often done in conjunction with a discussion about server-side GTM. And with SGTM, there are typically some pretty standard costs that you can estimate. If you're going the App Engine route, it's going to be 3 instances, and it's going to be $140 a month or whatever. If you're going with some of it with State.io or some of the other things, there's lower cost, but still it's fairly easy to estimate compared to what the BigQuery cost is. So there we go. So the process that I walk them through is that the very first thing you have to do is set up a Google Cloud Platform account. And here's where you have the 2 ways to do that. The first way I'm calling the personal GCP. And basically it's pretty easy to set up. You have your own instance of BigQuery, let's say, but you don't have, it's not linked to anything else in your organization. It doesn't benefit from any security that you can apply to everything that your account is doing. And this is primarily relevant if you are also setting up server-side GTM. So the personal is easy to set up, but all the security is limited within that account. And personal is my own term that I use for that. That's not a Google term, but that's how I like to think of it. The other one is the organization or cloud identity approach. So with the personal one, you basically create an account in GCP, and it's like 5 steps. It's really, really easy to do. And then you add BigQuery to it, which is also easy to do. And we can do that later if somebody wants to see that. But it's pretty easy to do. And then you're set. You link GA4 to it from the admin section, and you're pretty much done. A few caveats, but I'll hit those in a bit. The organization or the cloud identity takes a little bit longer and is a better way to go. And this is what I'm telling my clients. It's better because you're going to have all your projects under one place. You're going to be able to consolidate billing accounts, for example. You're going to be able to consolidate security across all those. You're less in risk of the person who set up that personal account leaving, and then you no longer have access to it. We've seen that so many times with Google properties that somebody set up and then left. So this is a better thing to do for an organization, to set up the organization. And you have to decide whether you have a couple of options here, whether you want to go with the cloud identity, which is just pretty much setting up the organization, or if you want to go the Google Workspace route. And I'll tell you that in the process, Google really tries to move you into the Google Workspace approach. You have to kind of not do that to set up the cloud identity. And there's nothing wrong with the Google Workspace approach, but there is cost associated with that. It's like, I don't remember, $7 a user or something like that. So if you're setting Google Cloud Platform up for a large organization, and they accidentally set up Google Workspace and it's $7 per person in the organization, you have some issues. So you really want to make sure that you're just setting up the cloud identity. For this, it's not a process that an agency can typically do. You typically need IT support because there's DNS verification and text records that have to be added in there for this to work. So you typically have to get the IT group involved, which means sometimes it's just easier to do the personal because you can do it. But the better approach is to do it through the organization. And the nice thing is that there's a really nice checklist that you can share with the IT group. And that's this group, this checklist. And let's go through that just a tiny little bit. So you can follow this checklist, or you can actually, the checklist also exists in the Google Cloud Platform, so you can follow it through there. It's a little bit more guided. We won't go into that here, but let's just look at some of the things you set up with the cloud identity. So the main thing you're going to do is set up a managed user account, which is going to be a generic domain-wide email address, like IT at Northwoods Digital or whatever. So that's giving you some security already. It's not tied into Fred Pike yet, whatever. You're also going to link your company's domain to Google Cloud and use the verification process. So that's where the IT group needs to come in. And if we go down a little bit, specifically, it's the verify your domain where they have to get involved. And it's not, this isn't a difficult process, but it can be a little bit time consuming, and I'll tell you why in just a bit. But so they're gonna log into their domain register and look, it already knows it's on WS Digital. It already knows who I am based on the email address that I'm using right up here. And then you're going to add text records to the DNS settings. So again, that's typically not something that an agency is going to have access to. That's why you need the IT group involved. So going back to here, the issue I run into all the time is that if they don't have an active GCP account, we go to do this and they can't verify the domain because it's already been verified. And that typically happens because they've set up a map API connection or something. So somebody at some point in time has used GCP, most often for the Google Map API, and no one that I'm dealing with in IT knows, oh, who set that up or how do we get access to it or whatever. So this has happened to me like 5 or 6 times. We just stop. A week later, they have figured it out internally. They know who to talk to. They've got it all straightened out. Then we come back. They can do they actually don't have to do the domain verification again, but now they've got that within this platform, and it's kind of funny how I run into this all the time. So, okay. So once we're past that step, we can look, if we look in the GCP, we'll see a couple of different designations that tell us whether we're in the personal or the organization. If you're doing anything with a personal version, you'll see this message saying it's in organization, no organization. So that's pretty clear. You don't have the organization set up. If you do have the organization, anytime you get to create a new project or select projects or whatever, that organization is going to show up in a pull down list. And it's pretty clear. Anything under there, all the projects that you have under there will just be in the one place. So all the security, the billing, all that stuff shows up under that one flow. So you can see why it's a better idea to set up the organization, because you will have better control long term. But you can also see why it's a bit of a pain. And for those of us who are trying to get this stuff done quickly, it's like, I'm just going to do the personal and worry about it later. Not a great idea, though. I have done that and then recovered later. So moving forward, once we've got the GCP account, the Google Cloud Platform account set up, now we're going to set up BigQuery, and we have a couple of decisions to make here too. First, we can set up a sandbox, and that's free, but it's limited to 60 days of data, which is not bad actually, because you can actually experiment with it. You'll get a good sense for what BigQuery is like, and it hasn't cost you anything. Or you set up the paid BigQuery, which requires that you have a credit card on the account, and you basically set up a billing account. So you have to provide Google with a credit card to do this. And if you do, the nice thing, and this has happened to me recently, if that credit card expires or there are any issues, Google gives you plenty of notice that there's issues with that billing account before they cut off, like your BigQuery example. That happened to me with a pretty big client this week, which was kind of funny. So those are your two choices, sandbox or paid. And now if you step back a bit, it's like, whoa. So what we can do, and this is something I can tell the client, if we want to just test this, we can set up a personal account, we can set up a sandbox BigQuery account, we can link GA4 to it, and now if you're really concerned about the cost, now we can estimate what it's going to be for you based on your real data, based on a month of real data, or 60 days, 2 months of real data. So this is with a couple clients, this has been very encouraging because they really did not want to incur extra costs or without knowing what they're going to be incurring. So we can say, yeah, we can do this. It's a quick and dirty way to do it. If you like it at the end, we can take that personal account. We can go through the process of setting up the organization and move this instance of BigQuery from no organization to your organization. So not a lot of risk here. If you do set up the sandbox, then you've got several indications in BigQuery that that's what you're running with. First, it says sandbox. I mean, it couldn't be much clearer than that. Two, your events are limited to, I thought it was 60, but it's actually 61, at least here anyway. So each event here is 1 day's worth of data. And you guys probably know that from BigQuery. When you send GA4 stuff to BigQuery, you get it all in a 1 day chunk of data, basically, of events. And so here we have 61 days worth of data. If you have the paid version, we'll see an example of this later, you actually get a second table, which is the intraday. So as events happen on your website, within seconds, they get sent to the intraday, but you need a paid account for that. So this is what you would have if you were just working with a client to test it and see how big how much data they're going to be collecting and what the ultimate cost will be. And again, at this point, it's totally free. But at some point, Google is going to want some money. So let's dive into the pricing model. And the weird thing about this, there's a nice BigQuery pricing sheet, which, you know, I look at BigQuery from the viewpoint of GA4. That's how I'm using BigQuery. But obviously, there's a lot of ways to use BigQuery and a lot of other people who are using BigQuery other than GA4 users. So this whole section on pricing, it goes pretty deep, goes pretty long, has all these things on like machine learning pricing and BI engine pricing and stuff like that. There is this documentation, this help screen confused me so much until I finally realized that, you know, I'm just interested in like the 3% of all this stuff that relates to GA4, because that's how I'm using BigQuery. And in general, for all these options, you're looking at two things: compute and storage, which I have conveniently highlighted here or included here. So let's start with the storage. The storage is, first, the really cool thing is that you have 10 gig free each month. So even if you have a paid account, you may never see a charge because that first 10 gig you get is free. So we'll see some examples here where it's going to be free for a client. After that, it's either 2 cents per gigabyte of storage for active local or 1 cent per gigabyte for long-term logical storage, rather. So what's the difference between those? Hold on, have an annoying call coming in. There we go. All right. So here's an example from BigQuery. I'm looking at the event table from 12/31. So this is more than 90 days ago, right? And my long-term logical bytes are 97 megabytes. So these would be charged at the 1 cent per megabyte fee per month. I'm sorry, per gigabyte fee. It's a megabyte. So I'm thinking, boy, that's a lot. It's going to cost a lot, but no, it's 1/10 of that. And then this one, which is from just a couple of days ago, is 114 megabytes. So the difference is that we have active logical bytes here, which is at the 2 cents, long-term, which is at the 1 cent. And again, just to refresh that. Oops. So that's the active at 2, the long-term at 1. All right, so it looks cheap already. Now, when does something become long-term and can it change? So it becomes long-term after 90 days of the data being put in and nothing happening to it. If you edit the table, the price reverts back to the active local storage and the 90-day timer starts again. And so what what constitutes editing the table, doing any of these things. What doesn't constitute editing the table, i.e., it remains long-term and free, is querying a table. And that's how you are most likely going to be interacting with these tables. You're not going to be injecting data into those tables, most likely, certainly not a 90-day old table, but you are going to be querying it, but that doesn't restart the timer. So that's pretty cool. The other nice thing about the long-term logical storage is that it's just as fast, it's just as responsive, it's just cheaper to use. So there's no performance or penalty hit in using that. So what does this look like with some real clients? I have I call it my SPPC, the super primitive pricing calculator. And let's see how much this is actually going to cost for a couple of prospective clients. Make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. All right, so I just looked at 2 clients who have weekly users of 81 or 100K. So they're nice medium-sized clients. They have event counts, and we'll talk a little bit why that's important, because there is a limit of how much you can send to the paid version of 1 million hits a day, and that pretty much correlates to an event. So none of these, this is the weekly number of events, and this is the daily average of events. So none of them are close to the million. So we're not going to run into that issue at all. But I just looked at 1 week's worth of data, everything from the beginning of the month. From April 1st through April 7th. And that gave me 312 megabytes of data that was collected across each of those individual days. And so in this one case, the days to reach 10 gigabytes, which is a free version, would be 224. So a little over half a year. If you continued at the same growth pattern and went out 5 years, you would have 8 10 gigabyte segments after 5 years, and that would cost you per month $1.43. And this is kind of a worst case, because that's assuming at the 2-cent level. If I did it at the long term, which is really what it should be, it's 71 cents a month. So I kind of like to go back in worst case here. And then another client, same calculation. They have more traffic. So their cost after 5 years would be $3.72. So, I mean, this is peanuts. This is really peanuts. And what I tell my clients is, even if I'm wrong by a factor of 10, you're going to be spending $14 a month, or, most likely it is going to be at the long-term cost. So you're going to be if I'm off by a factor of 10, you're going to be spending $7 a month or $18 a month. I mean, who cares? For that cost, you've got the GA4 data in your own location. You own all that data. You can do whatever you want with it for as long as you want. You don't have to worry about Google sunsetting GA4 and deleting the data like they're going to do with UA in a few months. So it's cheap, right? The other option I've done, and I didn't do it here, but you have to question, is this a representative week? And maybe it's not. So if I have the sandbox version, I can go back and look at all the weeks and figure out when was the heaviest traffic and just grab that. Or potentially, kind of a worst case, what single day had the most traffic, had the most data that got sent over to BigQuery, and then use that as my basis. So instead of using an average of 312 across all 7 days, I just use that as my daily count and then multiply it out. So there's lots of ways you can catastrophize, make some really bad assumptions here, and figure out that the cost is still really cheap. So my clients are happy to hear that compared to, the fixed cost of App Engine, for example. This making sense so far? Let's see. Is there any question that I should be asking here, answering yet?
We can, there's one question in the chat. If you want to answer it now, you may, or we can hold it to the end.
Yeah, this is a great question for Mike. Let's hold it to the end. Very good question. Okay, so back to the moving on from the super primitive. The next thing that we want to look at, the other part of the pricing, is the queries, the on-demand queries. And queries are when you're actually going against a SQL database in BigQuery and trying to extract information. So here you get 1 terabyte free of query space, and each additional terabyte is $5. So what does that mean? If I look, I looked at a couple of accounts that I have access to where there is a fair amount of data. So this one goes back 319 days, and it's fairly active. And I'm doing a really verbose SQL select. So I'm selecting everything all the way back to the beginning of this of the 2000s, actually. So basically, I'm getting everything, and you would never really run a query like this. I mean, when you run a query, you're going to select what columns you're looking for and things like that. But I'm just trying to be really verbose here and just get a worst case scenario. So this query, running it, is going to cost me almost 33 gigabyte of that 1 terabyte. If I look at another account, this one goes back 1,300 days, but doesn't have as much data per day. So this query, this verbose query, is going to cost me 38, 39 gigabyte. So it's going to take a lot of these to hit 1 terabyte. And if I go back to my sample here, did I just hide it? What did I do? Unhide. That's what I want to do. All right. So looking at the higher of those two, let's say they do that query for 38, I say gigabyte here, or megabyte, it's actually gigabyte. Like I said, this is a super primitive pricing calculator. I think I could probably do better. But so it's 38. Let's say you did 10 of those a day. So in a month, you'd have 11.4 gigabytes. Where you get the one. Let me get these. These numbers are too big. You'd have 11.4 terabytes. You get 1 terabyte free. So you'd have, all these should be gigabytes. You'd have 10.4 terabytes. So the cost would be $52. If you did it, I mean, let's just be stupid crazy. If you did 100 of those, now you're beginning to run into some real costs. But this is so far out of the bounds of reasonableness that it just doesn't make sense. You're not even going to run 10 queries like that are that verbose, that ugly per day, 30 days in a month. So this is really another worst case scenario. And if you have something like Analytics Canvas or some of those other tools that do the front end to this, they will optimize the queries, and that's part of their pitch, is that we'll optimize the queries. You're not going to do stupid things like what Fred is doing here with the select all from the table. So overall, I think we're looking at the big query does not equal big cost, because the storage is pretty cheap and the querying is highly unlikely to hit this level. So moving forward, here's that example. So the gotchas with this, there's a couple of things that I've run into. One is I haven't personally hit this, but I've seen some discussions of this in Measure Slack. That 1 million daily hits. So if you have a really big site, you can hit 1 million events or over 1 million events a day. And this is one of the larger ones that I have access to, and it's only hitting 34% of that, or so 340,000 hits per day. Obviously, there are sites that are much bigger than that, but if you do go over 1 million regularly, then you would need to go to the paid version of GA4, and that has support for, I think, billions of events. So essentially limitless. The other thing, and if you have the free version, the sandbox version of BigQuery, you only can do the daily. If you switch that to the paid version, one thing I've seen a couple of times is that you switch it to the paid version, you forget to come back into GA4 and turn on the streaming, so you don't get the intraday tables showing up, which is not the end of the world. I mean, that's not a catastrophic error, but it is something that you want to make sure that you go back and set up the streaming. And if you're one of those large websites that has more than 1 million events per day, you can't use the daily, but you can use the streaming, and you have unlimited streaming. So you don't get the daily breakdown in the tables the way smaller websites do, but you can still get all the data. I think there's some issues with that. Again, that's bigger than a lot of the clients that I work with, so I haven't run into that, but just from reading other things. So that's one gotcha. Make sure that you set up streaming again. The other thing, in the sandbox, there is a table expiration, and it's kind of at this point when I grabbed it, it was 61 days from the day I grabbed it. This is another thing that when you switch from sandbox to paid, you don't think that, oh, I've got to go back in and change the table expiration, and you want to make sure that you're set to never. The sandbox version will expire. You want to switch that to never for the paid version, and that's kind of a little hidden thing that can trip you up. So that's a second gotcha that I've seen. And then so now the question about cost. How about some real cost data? And I'm looking at the Northwoods billing account, one of the Northwoods billing account, and the main cost we have here is actually, and we're looking at 1 year's worth of data. The main cost we have is on the server side GTM, and actually I'm kind of surprised it's that high. I have to look into that. But then this is a BigQuery instance. So over the course of a year, and it's a fairly good sized client, $2.42, 12 cents, 6 cents, 2 cents. So the cost just, it's non-existent for all practical purposes. All right, so recapping, what do we want to do here? And this is, again, finishing up the client presentation, as you were, about why you want to go to BigQuery. So you want to set up a GCP account, ideally as an organization resource. You want to set up BigQuery, either as sandbox or paid, and then you can estimate your costs on real data if you're really concerned about it, or if after seeing that super primitive pricing calculator, you're saying, yeah, I'm not worried about 38 cents 5 years from now. Go right ahead. So the real recap here is basically it's cheap. There's no reason not to set up BigQuery. The cost is going to be almost non-existent. It's less than a rounding error. And that's where people usually say, all right, sign me up. So now we can do questions.
Awesome. That was great, Fred. Thanks so much for putting together a thoughtful presentation with,
Sure.
and I think that super primitive calculator was great. Great. So Mike asks, if we are managing the BigQuery integration for clients, is it better to have the data in their account, or should it be kept in our account?
Mike, that's a great question. So I would say it should always be in their account. The slide I just showed back here, oops, where was that? I know I'm breaking my rule here. This 242 is actually for a client. And I set it up under our account, knowing specifically that I didn't want to do that, but knowing that it was going to take their IT department and everything forever to do this. So literally, this has been running for over a year. Like a week ago, they finally set up their own, and I'm going to transfer it over into their own. But I didn't want to lose a year's worth of data because of politics on their side. So, and again, they knew that I made this, that I did this, that I was storing it under my own account, and they were grateful. So, but in general, you really want to have it under their own organization, and then they can make you an owner, they can make you an administrator of that organization, but it really should be, it's their data. They really should have control over it. And it's going to be their billing account, also their credit cards, all that stuff. Set it up on their side, or they should set it up, make you an owner or admin, and then you go from there.
If that's going to be a problem, can that BigQuery account be transferred into their account at some point?
Yeah, this account, which you can't see, that is a client account, and I'm going to be transferring it over to their organization.
Okay.
And it's not a difficult process to do that.
So for the sake of expediency, getting people set up, you could set it up in our account and just bill them until they get everything all squared away, and then just move that BigQuery account over.
Yeah, Mike, you can definitely do that. And I did that just with this one. I'm not sure I would do that routinely unless I thought it was really going to be a long delay on the client side.
Okay.
Hey, Fred, I have a follow-up on that, because I sort of have a different opinion, but also I don't know if I do or not. So I don't want to. So like, say that this is specifically in regards to GA4, right? So it's like taking the GA4 and just giving them a BigQuery instance, which I think is one use of BigQuery in the one that we're talking about here. We're also going to do this data mart that we're going to build for clients. Like, what if you were to take all the data, use your connectors, put it into a sheet, then upload that into BigQuery, run your queries off of it, populate all your client reporting from there? Wouldn't that be a system that you'd want to own as an agency if you were to do this on behalf of several clients? Wouldn't you want to have that? So I think there's different uses. There's the backup one, which definitely should be theirs. But what about if it's for your client reporting system that you're charging them for every month? That's not their data then, is it? Isn't that your data?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is your data. Well, I don't know, Jeff. I just hate to not let them. Will they continue to have access to that? Or, I mean, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, partially, as a service provider, if they're paying you to do something, then they get the work product, which is the data in this case, I think would be in the setup. So I think you can give them that, but then it's also like, it's almost like we're treating this as a one and done thing. Like, hey, you set up BigQuery one time, and then it's like, it just works now, which I think what you've shown is that way. But what about when it isn't one and done? Then I would think that there has to be some kind of that somebody has to own that process, right? And if you're owning the process, you have to own the account. Otherwise, you just get into new gatekeepers just with a different technology.
Yeah, and I'm not thinking this is one and done, because for sure the Liquor Studio reports come out of this after it's set up. So you're continuing to hit it. I think the whole data lake thing is, I mean, frankly, it's not something that I understand super deeply.
Yeah.
So,
oh, good. I just was curious because I'm about to say the opposite thing with our next workshop. So I'm just trying to think of whether I'm wrong or not before I start saying it. So that's all. Like, I mean, I think one of the big selling propositions for like Mike has an agency would be that they can set this up one time and then use the same setup for all their different clients, right? And then if you have to go and if they have to each put in their billing information, that could potentially break what you're doing. I would see that that'd be a value-added service to get that set up and to bill them every month. And then maybe once you terminate, then it goes to them. That's sort of how I'd approach this, probably.
Yeah, my concern is really on the termination. I mean, everybody who's in an agency has dealt with the time where the prior agency kept the data and you didn't have access. And I really do not want to be in that situation at all. So if there's some way to make sure that didn't happen, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, maybe that goes into the agreement. Then upon termination, you get the logins to BigQuery.
Yeah,
that's probably how I'd handle it.
Right.
Or we'll give you the option to move your data into your own instance, but you would keep all your processes, everything that feeds it, because that's proprietary.
I mean, that would be that's kind of why I asked the question, because most clients are not going to want to go through the round and round of getting things set up, getting billing set up, et cetera. If you can do that for them, it becomes a much easier sell from an agency standpoint. But at the end of the day, I had heard that you couldn't move the BigQuery into their account. So if at, like Jeff's saying, if upon termination, we can just hand over all the data and then good luck. that would be the best way from I think from a relationship standpoint. So if that can happen, and I think that would be probably the best scenario.
Yeah, I think you can definitely transfer the database to another database, and it's pretty much instantaneous.
Yeah,
because you're just moving storage to storage. It's really the account part that might be the tricky one.
Yeah.
We'll only have the guys at Analytics Canvas who know everything about BigQuery here right now. They'd be able to
exactly
straight, right.
Yeah. And
when is that? Probably knows too.
when is that? Go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to cut in there, but I did ask Canvas this question very specifically. And their recommendation was that the client own the account, and that you set up the API connections on the Google developer side, so that you can do all your stuff. But then if you unplug your stuff, the data is just sitting there, ready to go. So there are ways to set up those user accounts and key and API keys, and have your agency get billed for the, like you can take the bill for the data processing and stuff, and forward it to the client if you're doing all the reporting and dashboarding and stuff. But ultimately the storage account is in their Google Drive, basically. So that was Canvas's recommendation. And our agency doesn't offer any, outside of A/B testing and stuff. Like, we don't really offer any of the managed services for that stuff. So we wanted that to be the case. So we were happy to hear that answer, but I could see why an agency doing the analytics portion specifically wants to be stickier and have it in their own account. So I could see it working both ways.
Yeah. Wow. It's rare that Jeff and I disagree on anything. So,
well, I think it's just, I don't think we disagree.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
I think there's multiple use cases of this, and the deeper you get into it, then the more the lines are blurred. Yeah.
Okay. So Larry asks, and this is hilarious. Why not use the Google Cloud, the calculator that's already built for you? So, Larry, that's fascinating. I did not know about this. There used to be a calculator around that stopped working. I didn't know about this. So it's for all their products, which is awesome. The thing that the super primitive pricing calculator, which I have trademarked, is that while here you can put in the gigabytes and everything, you actually don't know what that is. You still need to figure that stuff out. So that's where the super primitive really comes in. But this looks great. I've never seen it. So thanks for sharing that, Larry.
Analytics Canvas has an article that explains how to use it too, because it isn't dirt simple. So, and I wanted to just pipe in a little bit on, the prior discussion, because we've been trying to go through this. There is nothing easy about BigQuery and the Google Cloud platform. It is incredibly complex. I mean, we haven't even figured out how to set up the IAM and the security and whatnot, because it's like a 1,000-page document trying to understand that, and all the permissions. I mean, the AI recommended that I cut back permissions from these users. And then when I went to go and implement scheduled queries, they couldn't be implemented because they didn't have the user, whichever one that was, didn't have the proper permissions and stuff like that. But, it is, we are really struggling with the whole BigQuery thing, because I'm not a BigQuery expert. It's been 20 years since I did, real database administration and database work and whatnot. And it's a whole new ball game. So I think I'm going to go back and look at the Analytics Canvas approach, because building all of this stuff from scratch is tough. I mean, the sharded tables are complex, and building partition tables on a programmatic scale and process, it's not easy. So it's a acquired taste, I think.
Yeah, so you can get really deep in BigQuery. I'm using it primarily, and the way I'm talking to my clients about it, primarily as the backup of GA4 and the source for Looker Studio, and that can be relatively easy to look at. I'm not a SQL expert, and I don't think you need to be. I think the fact that you've got this and you've got all the data backed up, you can find SQL experts. You can find people who need to go into this. You can use Analytics Canvas to build the queries up front for you or whatever. But I think just having it there and knowing that how cheap it is and having it primarily bypass the Looker Studio quotas is just a great solution. I don't disagree with you, Larry, that the whole GCP thing is super complex and it kind of blows my mind at times. I've not had the IAM permissions issues, maybe because we're just getting set up as owners and administrators and it's just flowing down easily that way. So I've not honed in tightly on all the different security levels that you might want to implement in a really secure environment. Any other questions? Let's see.
So let me I'll just add that
Yeah.
part of the reason why we're doing I'm just going to talk about this thing and we're starting. It's going to be the next course that we're launching, just because I want to. You all probably will want to do this one, but I have the same issues as you, Larry. It's like how much. Like I get this question all the time: how much do we need to know SQL? How much do we need to leverage software providers like Canvas? How much of it can we do on our own? And I think that those answers come through, like we're going to do a live case study with Analytics Canvas and data driven. And it's going to be 8 sessions where we're going to go through all this, 8 2-hour sessions. And it's going to be like planning your data sources, capturing the data sources, pushing it into the BigQuery, the Analytics Canvas BigQuery using their system, taking that, optimizing the queries for pulling data out, choosing how you're going to fuel your reports, feeding it to Looker Studio, and then how do you do maintenance, and then how do you pass that on to your client. So it's like 8 sessions, and each one is like 2 hours going through this. So we're going to commit 16 hours basically to live doing this. That's how complicated this is. It's like a lot. Every time that I peel back the onion, I'm like, oh, maybe we need to add another session here, or can we even get this thing done? And so we are working on that, and it starts May 2nd. So you're all going to be knowing about this sooner than later. But that's sort of that's the next follow-up of this is, like, to me, BigQuery became interesting to all of us and accessible once the Looker Studio quotas went in place. That was the first time we started to think maybe us, at least for me, that was the first time I was like, maybe we should do this thing, right? So it was GA4 had BigQuery. Everybody was talking about it, but nobody really used it. Then it was like Looker Studio doesn't work with the GA4 API quotas. It's not Looker Studio's problem, it's GA4. Let's try BigQuery, which we did in a live Brain Gains back in November, and it was pretty cool to see that. Now the next one is like, well, what else can we get in there now that we've ripped off the Band-Aid and we realize it's 1 cent a month to store this stuff? What else can we throw in there? Then the backup thing as well. So it was backup, and then it's like, what else can we do? And so I think that we're all teed up and interested now in doing this for the first time. Like Larry said, dusting off some of our old hats from 20 years ago. I was a DBA 20 years ago as well. I was writing SQL queries every single day. I haven't really had to as much lately, and I don't expect to. Honestly, I really don't expect to have to know that stuff as part of being able to do better reporting for your clients. And the way that we're structuring this is not so much about how to do the data structure. It's about how to leverage other tools that do the data structure for you. So I'm pretty excited about it. And it just seems like it's the right time now, right? Like I wouldn't have wanted to do this 6 months ago. I don't think I want to do it 6 months from now. I think that now is the time to do it.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. And I'm really excited about this upcoming sessions that you're doing.
We've got a time for probably one more question. Kyle asks, is there ever a scenario where you would just use the sandbox, maybe for small or medium-sized clients?
No, because of the 60 days limit. I think that rules it out. If you go to the paid version, you get the intraday, which I don't really care about. Some people might, but it's rare that you would actually need the intraday. but you would want the longer one. And so Kyle, for a small, medium-sized client, there's really not going to be any cost associated with it. So I would just go to the paid one. They do have to supply the credit card, but otherwise, just go to the paid version. And I'm not moving everybody to BigQuery, but a lot of clients I have.
So
Great.
Fred, when would you not move somebody to BigQuery?
I was just thinking that it's a great question. So I've got, and maybe this is wrong, maybe I shouldn't think about it, but like I was just dealing with someone and I don't think they've been in analytics in like 3 years, and it's just it's not part of what they're doing. And it's like, you know what, I'm not even going to bring up the complexity of BigQuery here. Let's just go with standard GA4, 14-month data retention. That's going to be way more than you've got now. And just for ease of conversation, if I was a super good analyst or a consultant, I probably would move them to BigQuery, but it's like, it's not worth it.
That's actually a great answer because for me, I have some clients that fit profile. I think I would just confuse them more if I brought up BigQuery.
Yeah. And if it's small and there aren't a lot of people looking at the Looker Studio that's going against the GA4 API, great. You don't need BigQuery. And so for some clients, it's totally overkill. All right.
Well, I thank you so much, Fred, and everyone for the discussion. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks all.